In this video, I'm going to go through the three poems that are at the end of the simile and metaphor presentation. Um, as I do this, please fill out your note sheet just to show that you've kind of followed along with this and have completed this part of the activity. I'll go through each one and kind of use the discussion questions on the side as a guide, but I'll kind of just talk about them a little bit as well. So hopefully that format makes sense for you. They're all very short, so you'll see that they all fit on a single slide, so they won't take too long. This first one is Harlem by Langston Hughes. Before I even read it, keep in mind that Langston Hughes was an author and poet during the Harlem Renaissance, which was a time when African Americans were, particularly in Harlem, creating a lot of art and music and literature that was really high quality. And one thing that certain authors would address is the issue of racism still going on in the world at that time. So that is definitely important background for understanding this poem, because when he says, "What happens to a dream deferred?" that dream that he's talking about is the dream of equality for African Americans. And something being deferred means it's pushed to the side. It's put off for a longer period of time. Okay, so I'll read through it quickly and then talk about some important parts of it. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Okay, so in this poem, he's again talking about racial equality and what happens when we push this thought, this dream of racial equality to the side, where we're saying someday, many years in the future, we'll be all equal, but that day is not today. So he's asking somebody whether or not it dries up like a raisin in the sun. So this would be an example of a simile. Okay, so does it dry up? Like, does it grow really weak? Like a raisin is already dried up and now it's in the sun. Does it grow so weak that we're going to just forget about it? Or does it keep bothering us? So does it fester like a sore and then run? Think of it like when you get scraped really badly and it starts oozing. It's supposed to be this disgusting image. Does it stink like rotten meat? So we have our third simile now. And again, it's making this kind of disgusting image of what might happen if we push this aside. Clearly, Langston Hughes doesn't want us just to push the dream of racial equality to the side for many, many years. Or crust and sugar over, like a syrupy sweet, almost like it had the potential to be nice and good, and now there's this crust developing on the top. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, okay? Think about the word sag, like you think of skin, like if something's sagging, that usually means like it's like you're exhausted, or it's really worn out and old, things like that. So he uses that word very specifically, but then like a heavy load is just weighing you down. So it's going to stick with them and make it so that they can't move on. So we have our, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth simile here, because again it uses the word like. Now at the end, we have something that's not a simile. This is a metaphor. Okay, it says, or does it explode? And that shift to a metaphor makes it seem more real, because it's not saying it's like it, it's just saying this is it. Okay. And the last thing is that this is a fairly threatening line, especially if you think about the fact that during the Harlem Renaissance, a lot of the people that were viewing all of this work by African Americans were white people. So saying, or does it explode, might say, or does it end in violence? Like explode, you would think of either like a bomb or a gunshot maybe, or things like that. So this is supposed to be this possible threat of violence if they don't actually get racial equality that he's bringing up here at the end. But the fact that he changes it to a metaphor makes it seem more real than the ones that are saying it's just like these things, and using similes up here. The second poem is Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. Okay, and you'll notice even in the title, which is just the first line of the poem, we have a metaphor, so this one's mostly going to be focused on metaphor as opposed to simile. But I'll read through and then just kind of explain it and go through these questions a little bit. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings a tune without the words, and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, a gale is a storm. And sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Okay, so hope is being compared to a bird. It says hope is the thing with feathers. The thing with feathers would be a bird. A bird would perch, a bird would sing. All these things that they're talking about relate to a bird. Even asking of a crumb of someone is like feeding the birds in the park, things like that. But her phrasing is really strange. Calling it the thing with feathers is not as affectionate as if she had compared it to a peaceful bird or something like that. The thing with feathers sounds almost grotesque, like there's something almost wrong with it. So it's not purely a positive poem here, and Emily Dickinson rarely has poems that are just positive. So she's saying that hope is this thing, okay, maybe like a bird, that perches in the soul. Okay, so that's where it lives, is in our soul. It sings a tune without words, okay, that isn't clearly positive either, and never stops at all. Okay, maybe that's not that positive either. Here it gets a little bit more positive, saying sweetest in the gale, like sweetest in the storm is heard. So when it's horrible in our life, the hope that we have is still really sweet. Okay, and gale here is another metaphor. It's being compared to our life. Okay, so the storm is being compared to the world around us in our life. The chillest land is being compared to the worst experiences we can go through. So notice that it doesn't even say that in here, but this is still a metaphor for what's going on in our life. It's just not as clear as at the top, hope is the thing with feathers. Anyway, it says sore must be the storm, so it has to be really terrible if it could actually kill this little bird or take this little bird and make it stop singing. So to get rid of our hope, we must have some terrible thing happen in our life. Okay, so that's what the second one is saying. It says, I've heard it in the chillest land, which is like the worst of times. I've even heard hope singing in my soul. And on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Now, I've already talked about how this kind of mixes some things that sound not so positive, like thing with feathers, with parts that are very clearly positive, like that it's sweet when life gets really hard. The end is a really strange comment. It says, even when things are absolutely as bad as possible, it doesn't ask a crumb of me. Like, it's not asking anything of me, which would mean either it's a gift to us, like it is there, and it never burdens us. We don't have to really work for it. Or it could even be saying that we don't necessarily deserve it, okay? Because we've done nothing to actually support this thing in our soul, this hope, and it just is there. So this poem has a few different ways that you can look at it, but either way, the topic is this hope that exists within us and how it takes something really awful to diminish that and kill that and get hope out of our lives, but how we don't really have to do anything to deserve it. It's just there, whether that means it's a gift or whether that means that we're spoiled. Okay. But it does use several metaphors. That was kind of the main point of using this one today. It is the thing with feathers, and then it uses all these terms that relate to a bird. Perches, sings, it calls it a bird down here. And then the gale, the storms of our life, are in here, even though it doesn't clearly say that it's being compared to our life. This last one is probably the most straightforward. So this is called A Poison Tree by William Blake. So I'll read through it and then kind of explain how it relates again to similes and metaphors. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. Okay, wrath is like anger. I was angry with my foe or enemy. I told it not, my wrath did grow. Okay, so I didn't tell anybody about my anger and it continued to grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears, and I sunned it with smiles and with soft deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night till it bore an apple bright, and my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine, and into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. Okay, so Blake is mostly using metaphor in here. In fact, I don't think there are any similes. No. So he's solely using metaphor. He's comparing what happens to his anger if he doesn't tell anyone. Like, I was angry with my foe, I told him not, my wrath did grow, to a tree. And we get that partially through the title, but partially through the words he's using. He watered it, he sunned it, so he's taking care of this plant. His tree bore an apple. So again, this is his wrath that's being compared to a tree, but not using like or as. So this one's both through the title, but also, again, through the words that he's using that have to be related to a tree, like watered, sunned, and bearing an apple. You can see that if he doesn't tell anyone about his anger gets worse and worse until it actually produces a poison apple, which his enemy sees and knows that it's his. Not knowing that it's poisoned, he tried to steal it, and in the morning, the narrator sees that his enemy is dead. Okay, he has taken and eaten the poison apple. So this shows a very negative way of dealing with our anger. It does get revenge, but it ends in somebody's death. Okay. The narrator himself is not necessarily William Blake, but you'll notice that the narrator doesn't have any sympathy toward his enemy. And it shows that if we hold these grudges, we will kind of go after each other and attack each other. So it says, in the morning glad I see. So this person isn't upset that his wrath grew and grew until it made this poisonous apple, like this thing that would destroy the other person. And he was actually happy when he saw his enemy outstretched beneath the tree, which would signify that he had eaten the apple and was poisoned, which we get from the title only. It's not actually in here anywhere else. And he would have died. Okay, so it shows this very negative way of dealing with our anger and how it affects us and how it makes us see the world differently and how it makes us hold on to our anger. Okay, but again, it's using the metaphor of our anger and this tree that grows out of it if we don't deal with it correctly. All right. Hopefully that helps clarify what similes and metaphors are like in actual poetry. But if you have any questions, please ask me. And that's it for this video.